The pregnancy look was soon overtaken by fashionable society's next obsession. It was highly risque, with young ladies donning what looked like cotton night dresses. They were low-cut, high-waisted, and exposed the arms. Welcome back to the world of the Georgians, where we're exploring this extraordinary era through the sharp and witty world of 18th century caricature and satire. I'm Alice Loxton, and today we're turning our attention to Georgian fashion and celebrity. In the 18th century, the right dress or wig could make or break a reputation, but where there was vanity, there was always someone waiting to ridicule it. Satirical artists loved to lampoon excess, and nothing was easier to mock than a hairstyle that was 2 feet high or a gown that could hardly fit through the door. Clothing in the 18th century court wasn't just about personal taste, it was about class, wealth and power. A lavish wardrobe signalled influence. Ladies in wealthy circles were required to wear the court uniform, the mantua. This coat-like dress spread out sideways over immensely wide hoops and was a spectacle to behold. The mantua was tightly laced, uncomfortable and immensely heavy because of the silver in the weave. Women would wear it alongside their best jewels and preferably a fan. Another trend that was very popular in the 1790s was for women to pad out their stomach in a bid to appear pregnant. On seeing such fashions in the streets, one Dutch farmer wrote, "Oh, God help their poor parents, how miserable they must be upon perceiving the situation their daughters are in." The pregnancy look was soon overtaken by fashionable society's next obsession. It was highly risque, with young ladies donning what looked like cotton night dresses. They were low-cut, high-waisted and exposed the arms. And most shocking of all, the muslin used to make them was near transparent and clingy. When the Regency years dawned in 1811, styles shifted dramatically. Inspired by classical antiquities, skirts narrowed and waists rose to just beneath the bust, with delicate muslins replacing the heavier, stiffer fabrics that came before. Hair that had once been elaborately styled and adorned was now replaced with natural curls. Gentlemen, too, refined their appearance as the century progressed. Early on in the period, they wore shirts with lacy cuffs beneath fine waistcoats and breeches, accessorised with shining shoe buckles, but by the Regency they wore more tailored coats with riding boots. And of course the expense of keeping up with the latest fashion trends was staggering. In fact, a single dress could cost as much as a townhouse. So those wishing to keep pace with the latest fashion trends needed deep pockets. Unsurprisingly, the stylish members of polite society were evergreen material for London's artists and satirists. Which brings me on to today's first print by James Gillray. One of the subjects which the caricaturists of the Georgian period adored working with was contemporary fashion. And this image, the Graces in a High Wind, is a great example of it, because here we see the juxtaposition between the pretense of walking out and having this great air of looking fashionable and graceful, but the reality in the blustery British weather is quite different. Now, fashion was something that people were always confused by at the time, as they are today. There's a quote from 1794 from a magazine which described female dress of the present fashion. They said it is perhaps the most indecent ever seen in this country. The breast is altogether displayed, and the whole drapery, by the wanton management of the wearers, is said to cling to the figure, that nothing can be said to be completely concealed. So, very revealing. There's also a lovely quote that I found from Jane Austen, She was writing to her sister in 1801, recalling how she was at dinner one evening and looking at the clothing of her friend. Jane Austen said that her friend was at once expensively and nakedly dressed. So you can see there's a juxtaposition in this period where the very wealthy, paying a lot of money for their clothes, were also not wearing very much material. So the Three Graces, well, this is a great subject from art, and this is something which Gillray does a lot, is he takes timeless themes, so themes that might have been popular in the ancient world, themes that might be used by grand artists, by Rubens or Reynolds, and the Three Graces is often used to depict three goddesses from the ancient world. There are a lot of paintings by the likes of Rubens where we see three female goddess-like figures. But here we see them in the reality of the day-to-day in London. Here are the three women taken from nature, it says, in Kensington Gardens. So they're strolling around Kensington Gardens. And you can see it's an autumnal day. We've got the colours of autumn here. And they're in these muslin dresses. And these muslin dresses were incredibly thin material. They were a very light material, which gives a kind of beautifully ethereal texture. But in a blustery wind, as we can see here, they reveal far too much. And that's the great joke here, that they're really struggling with maintaining their modesty in the reality of British weather. So it's a very silly print. It's a mockery of high society. It's a mockery of fashions and pretensions of the day. And as is so common with Gillray's work, there's often an animal in the corner. Here we have this little dog looking on in bemusement at the ridiculous scenes unfolding in front of him. Much like modern celebrity culture today, the more famous and visible you were in Georgian Britain, the more your body, your dress, even your gestures could become sights of scrutiny. And in the early 19th century, few singers stirred up as much admiration and controversy as the British opera star Elizabeth Billington. Born in 1765 to musical parents, her father was a German oboist, her mother a singer, Billington was trained early in both voice and keyboard. She dazzled audiences in London before heading to Italy in the 1790s, where her career and her reputation truly took off. But in Italy, she was almost as famous for gossip as for her voice. Pamphlets and newspapers accused her of impropriety, spreading wild stories about affairs with aristocrats and fellow performers. One particularly vicious rumour even claimed she poisoned a rival singer, an accusation with no evidence, but the kind of story that made her irresistible to the public imagination. By 1801, after the death of her first husband and a hasty second marriage to a Frenchman with a questionable reputation, Billington returned to the London stage. Her comeback caused a sensation and inevitably caught the eye of satirists like James Gillray. Here we have Elizabeth Billington as imagined and depicted by Joshua Reynolds. Now, I have a real problem with this because here we see Elizabeth Billington as a very passive figure. She's imagined as a goddess that's rising through the clouds up towards heaven. We can see these heavenly sun rays coming down from the skies. We can see this heavenly host who are crowning her as the goddess of music, and these Cupid-like figures who are singing. But look at her. She's not even singing. She's silent. And for me, this doesn't capture the real woman. And that's what Gillray did. He captured the real Elizabeth Billington. But here we have a much more realistic version of Elizabeth Billington. You can see her head is thrown back, her hand is on her chest, another one is outstretched, and importantly, her mouth is open. She's actually singing. This is her on the stage, and you can see her voice itself is depicted in these swirly lines that disappear into the air. And when I look at this image, I really feel like you can hear her voice. You can hear the power of her voice. You can see how pink cheeks she is. This is the kind of voice that would fill an opera house, the kind of voice that might even smash a glass with its vibrations. And I think in some ways it's making fun of the classical depictions like that of Reynolds's work. And it's not necessarily completely favourable because it's quite a silly, humorous image in lots of ways. But why I like this image is that I feel it really captures the spirit of Elizabeth Billington. It captures her as an opera singer in her prime, as an exceptional professional musician at her very best. It's also interesting to think about the cult of celebrity in the Georgian era, because lots of people at this time would have seen Elizabeth Billington, perhaps travelling to the opera houses. They might have seen her sing. So when these prints were out in the windows, on the print shop windows, people would be able to point to her and say, oh, look, it's Mrs. Billington. And they'd look at the colours of her dress and they'd look at the details and they'd look at her rings and her amazing feathers. And some people actually collected these prints. So if you were wealthy, you might have these at your home. And so you bring them out and you'd show them to your friends. And then again, you might be able to look at this image together and think, oh, remember that time when we went to see Elizabeth Billington on stage. So a real insight into how celebrity and celebrity image was curated and spread. Georgian caricature reminds us that fashion in the Georgian period was more than just clothing. It was performance, ambition, and sometimes outright folly. Artists like James Gillray delighted in deflating pomposity, showing that behind every towering hairstyle or lavish gown was just another human being, vain, ambitious, and occasionally ridiculous. Next time, we'll be looking at how Georgian satire could be surreal, grotesque, and ahead of its time, influencing the world of caricature for generations to come.